At the far end of Prescott Middle School's room 204, near a window that barely let in the morning light, sat Imani Brooks, 13 years old, invisible by design. The sun tried to creep through the dirty glass, casting a hazy outline along her desk, but never quite reaching her. It was fine. Imani didn't need light. She'd already learned how to exist in shadows. Her violin case rested between her knees, wrapped in tape at the corners, its faux leather peeling like old bark. She never let it touch the floor. She never let anyone else carry it. Most of her classmates assumed she brought it to get attention. In reality, she carried it like armor. Imani didn't raise her hand in class. She didn't volunteer. She didn't whisper secrets in the back row or pass notes under desks. She sat still, notebook open, hoodie up, eyes on the board. If teachers forgot to call her name during roll, she didn't correct them. She didn't care to be noticed. But then came Thursday afternoon. Coach Langston, a towering former college linebacker turned underpaid PE teacher, was now also the reluctant director of the annual talent night. He stood at the front of the room, clutching a clipboard like it might run away. His voice boomed in a half-joking, half-resigned tone teachers use when they've been voluntold to do something. All right, folks, talent night's next week. We're still short on performers, so singers, dancers, magicians, whatever you've got, now's your time to shine. The class barely reacted. A few heads turned. Someone snorted. A kid in the second row muttered something about juggling flaming pencils. Another dropped their pen on the floor and didn't bother picking it up. Then came the moment. Ms. Claiborne, the school's notorious math teacher, known for her sarcasm, her colorless sweaters, and her ability to insult a student without raising her voice, was perched at the corner of the room, sipping coffee like she hated it. She gave a little nudge to Coach Langston, then cocked her chin toward the back of the room. "What about our little violinist in the corner?" she said, just loud enough to be dangerous. "Brooks, isn't it? You've been hauling that thing around all year. Maybe it's time you showed us it's not just for show." The room snapped to attention. A beat of silence. Then came the laughter. "Yo, she's gonna play hot cross buns. Bet she only knows Mary had a little lamb." "Nah, it's probably just a lunchbox." A kid in the row ahead of Imani mimicked the screech of a violin being tortured. The sound echoed through the classroom like nails on glass. Even Coach Langston chuckled, unbothered. "Come on, Brooks. You've been treating that case like it's the Hope Diamond. Let's see what you got." Miss Claiborne's smile widened. "Just teasing, sweetheart," she added in that patronizing tone that always made black girls feel smaller. "We all want to hear a little music." Imani didn't react. Not at first. Her fingers slowly curled tighter around the neck of the violin case. She didn't look at anyone. Not the students. Not Coach Langston. Not Ms. Claiborne. Her gaze stayed forward, steady and unshaken. And then, without warning, she spoke. "Okay." That was it. One word. Flat as slate. The room stopped. The laughter didn't so much die as it choked on itself. A weird pause filled the air, like everyone had been caught off guard by her refusal to fold. Coach Langston blinked. "Wait, you serious?" Imani stood, calm and deliberate, and walked to the front of the room. Her shoes barely made a sound against the tile. She took the clipboard from Langston's hand without asking, scanned the sign-up sheet, then wrote, "Number 16, Imani Brooks, violin, original piece." She didn't smile, didn't flinch, didn't say another word. She handed the clipboard to the next kid and walked back to her seat. Her violin case still held like a secret. Miss Claiborne blinked slowly. Her smirk faded by a fraction. She laughed again, but this time it wasn't confident. It was filler, a reflex, the kind of laugh people use when they feel something shifting beneath them. Class resumed. Coach Langston tried to move on, calling for the next volunteer. But no one heard him. Whispers filled the room. People stared. But Imani? She just sat. Same seat, same silence. Except now, something was different. Because the joke had been made. The whole class had laughed. But now, they weren't sure who the punchline belonged to anymore. It started in the hallway. The moment the last bell rang, the whisper campaign began. Imani Brooks, the quiet girl, the one with the scuffed violin case and secondhand sneakers, had signed up for talent night. And not just to play some sheet music from the back of a beginner's book. She was going to play an original piece. The words were repeated with varying degrees of disbelief, mockery, and outright sarcasm. Original piece? One boy said near the lockers, "She probably means she's going to freestyle Jingle Bells. Bet she doesn't even know how to tune it. She's going to cry halfway through and run off stage. Watch." By the time Imani reached the cafeteria, half the 8th grade was buzzing. Even kids from other homerooms were catching wind. Someone had already drawn a cartoon on the whiteboard in the back of science class, a stick figure with a violin exploding in her hands, labeled Brooks' big debut. She didn't stop walking. She didn't pause to correct anyone or defend herself, but she heard every word. Stored it like kindling. Let it pile up, slow and silent. Teachers told Black Girl to play violin as a joke. They just didn't know what they'd lit. At lunch, she sat alone as always. Her violin case rested beside her on the bench like a quiet friend. She didn't open her tray. She didn't touch the bruised apple or the lukewarm carton of milk. She stared straight ahead at nothing. Across the room, Coach Langston leaned against the wall, scanning the cafeteria like he was patrolling a locker room. When his eyes met Imani's, he offered a half smile. Not warm, just an attempt. He started to walk toward her. She didn't blink, just raised one eyebrow slightly, and he stopped, turned, walked the other way. He wasn't used to being looked through like that. Meanwhile, in the teacher's lounge, the conversation had taken on its own form. Ms. Claiborne stirred her tea with robotic patience, eyeing the printout of the talent night sign-up sheet posted beside the microwave. Her voice was low, but sharp. She actually signed up. "Who?" asked Mr. Jennings, the science teacher. "Brooks, the violin girl." Jennings chuckled. "She signed up? I mean, she's always carrying that thing. Maybe she's good." Claiborne tilted her head. Or maybe she set herself up to be humiliated in front of the entire gym. Mrs. Reyes, the art teacher, who had been quietly sketching lesson ideas in her notebook, didn't look up when she replied. Or maybe, she said, "You're just scared she won't be." Claiborne froze mid-stir. Reyes continued calmly. "I've seen that kid practicing by the art room after hours. Same notes over and over, until her fingertips probably bled. That's not a girl trying to show off. That's a girl trying to survive." Claiborne didn't respond, just dropped her spoon into the mug, letting the clink echo longer than it should have. Outside the lounge, the school's energy shifted. Talent night was always a big deal. Part performance, part popularity contest, part disaster waiting to happen. But this year, Imani's name had changed the stakes. Because it wasn't just a name. It was a challenge, a silent one. A black girl who barely spoke was about to take center stage. And she wasn't there to smile or entertain or beg for approval. She was just coming, and no one knew what to do with that. Back in math class, Miss Claiborne couldn't help herself. As the bell rang and students began packing their bags, she cleared her throat. "Just a reminder," she said, voice light, eyes pointedly avoiding the back of the room. "Talent night's next Friday. I hope everyone who signed up remembers that courage and talent aren't the same thing." A few snickers, a few glances. Imani didn't move, didn't even blink. She waited until the last student had left before standing, slow and smooth, violin case in hand. She walked past Miss Claiborne's desk, not stopping, not hesitating, but just before the door, she paused, barely, and said without turning, "Maybe you'll figure out the difference by then." Then she was gone, leaving a silence so thick, Claiborne had to sit down. That evening, back at the Brooks apartment above the pawn shop, the air smelled faintly of Clorox and burnt toast. The lights flickered in the kitchen when the microwave and bathroom fan were running at the same time. Marlon, her 6-year-old brother, sat on the living room floor, coloring on the back of junk mail. Imani stood by the window, tuning her violin. Click, twist, listen, adjust. Her mom, Danielle, entered, still in her janitor uniform, her arms tired from another 10-hour shift. She leaned against the doorframe. "You sure about this?" she asked softly. Imani didn't turn. I already said yes. Danielle nodded, walked over, picked up the fraying bow, and ran her fingers along the splinters. You don't owe them anything, baby. You don't gotta prove nothing people who ain't looking to understand you in the first place. I'm not doing it for them. Danielle looked at her daughter's back, rigid, focused, humming with something dangerous and beautiful. Then who? Imani stared out the window. The city lights blurred in the distance, flickering behind iron bars and dusty blinds. Me. That night, the laughter still echoed in hallways and group chats. It carried in whispers and screenshots, but it was already starting to shift, because a joke, the one that was supposed to break her, it had only confirmed what she'd been quietly building for months. Teachers told Black Girl to play violin as a joke, but now they were going to remember it for the rest of their lives. And for the first time, Imani smiled, not wide, not loud, but real. A storm was coming, and she was the one playing the soundtrack. Imani's walk home wasn't long, just 4 blocks, but every step felt like crossing through 2 worlds. The first was the school world, fluorescent lights, clanging lockers, laughter that always seemed just a little too sharp when it turned in her direction. There, she was the quiet girl in the back, the one no one invited, the one with the violin case that was older than her shoes. But once she turned down Jefferson Avenue, past the liquor store and the mural that used to be vibrant before the paint cracked and faded, she crossed into her world. Real life. No teachers, no sneers, just survival. She lived in apartment 2B, above a pawn shop that still had Christmas lights in the window, even though it was March. The buzzer didn't work. She jiggled the lock just right, then climbed the narrow staircase, careful not to step on the warp board that always screamed underfoot. Inside, the air was warm and stale, a mix of pine sol and whatever was cooking in the apartment next door. She dropped her bag next to the door and set the violin case gently on the coffee table like it was glass. Marlon, her 6-year-old brother, ran in from the hallway, a red crayon tucked behind his ear and dried applesauce on his shirt. "Did you sign up?" he asked wide-eyed. Imani smirked. "Yup." "You gonna win?" She shrugged. "That's not the point." He tilted his head. "Then why do it?" She ruffled his curls, then stepped over a pile of laundry and walked into their shared bedroom. The room was small, 1 bunk bed, 1 window that barely opened, but it was hers. And more importantly, it was where the music lived. She clicked open the violin case. Inside, the wood was scratched, worn soft from years of practice. The bow was wrapped with tape. 1 peg was loose, but it still sang when she asked it to. That mattered more than new strings. She took off her shoes, rolled up the cuffs of her jeans, set a towel along the bottom crack of the door to muffle the sound, a routine so practiced it was almost holy. Then she placed the violin under her chin and played. No sheet music, no scales, just sound, raw, unfiltered, notes that didn't ask for permission. Because the violin was more than an instrument. It was a voice, her voice, the only one that had never betrayed her. Every night, for nearly 6 years, this was how she spoke. Through her fingertips, her breath, her trembling bow. Her mom, Danielle, never interrupted. She knew the rule, no knocking unless the rhythm fell apart. 3 soft taps meant start over. Not with judgment, not with shame. Just care, just the pursuit of truth. Danielle worked the night shift cleaning law offices downtown. She left at 6:30 every evening with aching knees and came home just before dawn smelling like bleach and tired silence. But every night, she stood on the other side of that bedroom wall and listened. She didn't need to know the names of the notes. She knew when they were honest. And Imani, she never faked a note. Not when her fingers bled from practice. Not when her classmates laughed behind her back. Not even when she wanted to quit. And she did, more than once, but never could bring herself to put the violin away for good. That night, after an hour of playing, she stopped. The room was dark now, lit only by the streetlight leaking through the blinds. Her arms ached. Her palms were red. Her legs had fallen asleep from sitting cross-legged on the floor. She exhaled, set the violin down gently on the bed. Then she opened a drawer, pulled out an old photo, creased, faded, but still intact. Her grandfather. He was holding a fiddle in the picture, sitting on a porch step, barefoot, with a bottle cap on the ground next to him and a grin. So why'd it made you feel like the sun had just come out? He died when she was 9. But before he passed, he taught her the blues. Not just how to play it, how to feel it. If you can't say it, he'd whisper, his breath smelling like peppermint and sorrow. Then you play it. Play it until they feel you. She kept that photo in the drawer next to her music notebook. A book full of scribbled phrases, finger patterns, melodies with no names. The piece she was building for Talent Night, it wasn't a song. It was a confession. Half blues, half classical, all fire. It didn't follow any rules. It didn't need permission from teachers who rolled their eyes or classmates who only knew songs from TikTok. It came from something older, something deeper, something that didn't ask to be liked, just understood. The next day, during homeroom, 2 girls passed by her desk and giggled. Still bringing that beat-up case? One of them said, pretending to trip over it. Imani didn't flinch. She just reached down and ran her fingers along the latch. She wasn't scared of their laughter anymore. She'd heard it before. It was just noise. And noise couldn't touch what lived inside her music. Teachers told Black Girl to play violin as a joke. But jokes don't make people practice until their fingers go numb. Jokes don't make someone stare at a blank page for hours, trying to find the exact note that matches a memory they can't name. Jokes don't survive poverty, grief, or silence. Imani did, because she wasn't trying to impress them. She wasn't trying to prove she belonged. She was trying to remind herself that she did. And when Talent Night came, she wasn't going to apologize for taking up space. She was going to command it. The door creaked open at 6:29 p.m., right on time. Imani Brooks, still in her faded custodial uniform and white sneakers coated in dust, stepped into the apartment like she'd been walking on a battlefield. Her back ached. Her feet screamed. But she didn't complain. She never did. "Imani," she called out. "In here," came the soft reply from the bedroom. Danielle poked her head in, wiping her forehead with a paper towel from the kitchen. Imani sat cross-legged on the floor again, violin in hand, bow resting on her shoulder like a sleeping blade. No music played. Not yet. She was still, calm like the eye of a hurricane. Danielle took one look at her daughter's fingers and winced. Raw, pink, cracked along the edges. "You need to soak those," she said, stepping into the room, holding the familiar towel she always worn for moments like this. "I will," Imani said, not looking up. "Just one more run." "Same one." Imani nodded. Danielle sat on the edge of the bed and stayed silent. She knew better than to interrupt when Imani was in this zone. She wasn't just practicing. She was building something. The piece had no name, no key signature, no sheet music, just emotion woven into a blend of blues and classical. The 2 languages her grandfather had taught her without ever naming them as such. He used to say, "Blues is what happens when the truth gets too big for words. Classical is what happens when the truth wants to sound like fire dressing glass." This piece, it was both. Her bow hovered above the strings. Then she played. It began like breath. Quiet, unstable, like she was searching for words, unsure if they'd come. A low note stretched across the air, trembling but controlled. Then another, rising, a question. Her fingers moved faster now, sliding, bending, digging into the wood like she was trying to pull something out from beneath it. And then the shift. The moment she always worked hardest on. A sudden drop. A sound like heartbreak slipping into the rhythm of a fight. She bent the strings with her wrist, her elbow rising, bow flying like a whip across the bridge. It wasn't pretty. It was painful. And that was the point. Her body swayed with the rhythm like she was dancing with something invisible and dangerous. Each note bled into the next, building tension, stretching silence, then shattering it. By the time she finished, her chest was heaving. The room was silent again. Her mother's eyes were wet, though she said nothing. She just reached out and pressed a warm towel into Imani's hands. You're gonna break your fingers if you keep pushing like that. They're already broken, Imani whispered. Danielle didn't laugh, didn't scold. She just nodded. Still, you push too hard. They'll give out. You don't owe anybody pain. I'm not doing it for them. Then who? There was a pause. Imani looked at the wall, to the photo taped there. Her grandfather, smiling in front of a fishing boat in Louisiana, violin in hand, shoulders stooped but eyes proud. For me. That answer settled between them like dust in sunlight. Danielle leaned back against the bedpost. You play like you've been carrying something that doesn't want to be carried. I am. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The music said what she couldn't. She set the violin down, beside her, like it was sleeping. She flexed her fingers, wincing as she touched her thumb to her palm. A shallow crack ran across her knuckle. Almost done, she said under her breath. Danielle stood. You know they're gonna laugh, right? Some of them. Maybe even a lot of them. I know. And that don't scare you? It does, Imani said. But I'm more scared of being the girl they think I am. There it was. The truth. Not shouted. Just offered. Like a confession in the dark. Danielle stepped out quietly. But before she left the room, she said, then make him listen. That night, Imani didn't sleep much. She rewound performance in her head over and over. Her entrance, the shift in the middle, the final note that needed to linger just right. She knew how to hit it. She just didn't know if her hands would last. In the corner of the room, Marlon snored softly in his bunk. She looked at her violin again. Her bruised fingers, the tape on the bow, the faded case that used to belong to her grandfather. It was old. It was chipped. It was hers. And it held more truth than any words ever had. At school the next morning, whispers followed her through the hallway. She's still doing it? No way she doesn't freeze up. Teachers told Black Girl to play violin as a joke. She actually took it serious? Imani walked past them all, silent, unmoved. Inside her chest, her heart thundered like a bass drum, but she didn't let it show, because the stage wasn't the gym. It wasn't the school. It wasn't even the people watching. The stage was wherever she decided to play her truth. And that stage? It was already burning. The sign-up sheet went up at 7:58 a.m., duct taped to the faded bulletin board next to the broken vending machine that hadn't dispensed anything in years. The header, printed in all caps with a smiley face, sticker peeling off the corner, read, Prescott Middle Talent Showcase, Friday 6 p.m. Sign up to show out. Underneath, 15 names already filled the list. Most were written in rush penmanship, some with doodles next to them, a microphone, a soccer ball, a star. Line 16 was empty. For now, Imani stood a few feet away, her violin case hanging from her shoulder like armor. She didn't move toward the board. Not yet. A crowd of students had already gathered around, fingers pointing, lips murmuring. It was a morning ritual, watching the list, guessing who'd bomb, who'd break, who'd bring a whole mess of secondhand embarrassment. You think she's really gonna do it? Someone asked. Who? A boy said, pulling a bag of hot Cheetos from his hoodie. Brooks, the violin chick. There was a pause, followed by a scoff. Bet she plays Mary Had a Little Lamb and starts crying. Laughter. It came easy to them, like gravity. Imani stepped forward. She didn't speak, didn't flinch, just reached for the pen dangling by the string. In one smooth motion, she wrote, Number 16, Imani Brooks, violin original. No hesitation, no decoration, just fact. The laughter quieted, not completely, but enough for the sound of the pen scratching paper to linger for a second too long. She capped the pen, turned and walked away. No explanation, no eye contact, just presence. Like a storm cloud gliding past windows no one bothered to shut. Mr. Langston was standing near the stairwell, clipboard in hand, pretending to read something that didn't exist. His eyes lifted when he saw her pass. You still in? He asked. Imani stopped for half a breath, turned her head just slightly and met his gaze. The look she gave him wasn't angry. It was colder than that. Flat, uninterested, like he was background noise. Then she walked on, leaving the scent of doubt in her wake. Langston scratched the back of his neck. "Damn," he mumbled. Later that day, the whispering got louder. It echoed in the lunchroom, behind lockers, in the corners of bathroom stalls. "She's really doing it. She got something to prove?" Teachers told black girl to play violin as a joke, and she said yes? That's wild. Some said she was brave. Some said she was stupid. Most said nothing, just waited to see if the crash would be worth watching. By 4 p.m., the sign-up sheet had been photographed and shared across 2 group chats and a school Instagram meme page. A post with a grainy screenshot of Imani's name got 128 likes and 47 comments by dinner time. The caption read, "Plot twist of the year, hashtag number 16. At home, Imani barely noticed. She sat on her bedroom floor, legs crossed, violin resting in her lap like a living thing. She didn't rehearse. Not yet. She just stared at the wood grain, tracing its worn edges with her thumb. The number 16 echoed in her head. 16 wasn't a number. It was a spotlight, a trap, a challenge. 16 meant she'd go on after all the singers, dancers, the kid doing magic tricks, and the girl who planned an off-key cover of Billie Eilish for weeks. 16 was the moment everyone would have their phones out, half bored, half waiting for someone to fail. 16 was where silence either swallowed you or made you unforgettable. Imani had chosen it on purpose. She wanted the last word. Her mom walked in as the sun dipped behind the apartment buildings. "You ready for this?" Danielle asked, arms folded, towel still in hand. "I think so," Imani said. "Still want to do your original?" She nodded. "It's all I got." Danielle sat beside her on the floor. "Good. Don't give them what they expect. Make them feel something they don't know how to explain." "I'll try." "No," Danielle said. "You won't try. You will." Imani smiled faintly. Not a full smile. Just enough to say she heard her. That night, Imani laid in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the streetlights outside. She thought about how it started. The smirk, the laughter, the just kidding voice behind the joke. Teachers told black girl to play violin as a joke. And now that joke had a name, a seat on the stage, a countdown. The world didn't expect much from girls like her. And that was exactly why she couldn't afford to be anything less than unforgettable. Friday was coming. So was number 16. And no one, not Langston, not Claiborne, not the kid with their phones and whispered bets, no one was ready for the truth hiding inside her fingers. It was almost time to show them. And this time they wouldn't laugh. The violin cried before she did. It was almost midnight in apartment 2B, the walls humming from the vibrations of a nearby train, the floor sticky with the wear of time, and the ceiling fan spinning a half-hearted breeze that couldn't quite cool the room. Imani Brooks sat cross-legged on the floor, her back against the edge of the couch, bow in hand, violin resting against her shoulder like it was part of her body. The wood was warm. The string buzzed. Again. She tightened the E string slowly, then too far. Snap! A sharp twang cracked the silence like a slap. Imani didn't flinch. She exhaled through her nose, rolled her shoulders, reached into the case for the backup string. She was down to her last one. The bridge leaned to the left. The bow's tip was split. The hair frayed like the laces of worn-out sneakers, barely hanging on. She adjusted the bow and tried again. Scratch. Stop. Start over. Scratch. Stop. Again. Her fingertips were raw now, faint blisters bubbling where calluses used to hold strong. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Every time she paused, the sound of laughter from room 204 echoed in her head. The fake screeches. The joke Miss Claiborne delivered like a punchline. Teachers told black girl to play violin as a joke. And maybe that's all it was to them. But to her, it was everything. In the other room, her mother stirred, the shift of weight on an old mattress. A quiet groan. Danielle Brooks had come home just after 11 p.m. Her janitorial uniform smelled of bleach and steel polish. Her back ached. Her hands were cracked. She hadn't said much when she walked through the door, just a kiss on Imani's forehead and a whisper. Still working? Imani had only nodded. She always did. Now, Danielle leaned in the doorway, arms folded, a damp dish towel hanging from her shoulder. "Baby," she said softly. Imani paused mid-note. "You've been at it since I left for work." "I'm almost done." "Your hands look like you stuck M in a toaster." Imani flexed her fingers. The pain shot down to her wrist. "I can't mess this up." Danielle crossed the room, sat beside her daughter, took her hands gently into hers. Her touch was callous but careful. A mother's touch, trained to find hurt before it turned to harm. "You play like this tomorrow, your bow's gonna fall apart. And so are your fingers. I'll retie it. That's not what I'm worried about." Imani looked down. Her voice came out like breath. "They want me to fall." Danielle's jaw clenched. "Then show them how hard you land." There was a pause. The fan squeaked. "I'm not doing it for them," Imani added. "Then who?" Imani looked up. "For me," she said. "For Marlon. For the nights I played till I couldn't feel my hands, and still heard laughter the next day." Danielle wrapped the towel around her daughter's fingers, pressing it gently against the sore spots. Steam rose from the fabric. "I get that," she said, "but pain doesn't mean proof. Don't bleed just to make em watch." "I'm not bleeding," Imani said. "You will be," Danielle muttered, pressing down firmer. An hour later, Imani lay in bed, her hands bandaged in warm cloth. Marlon was curled up on the other side of the room, blanket kicked halfway off, snoring lightly. She stared at the ceiling, the shadows and the streetlight cutting lines across the cracked paint. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "If you can't say it, play it." She whispered it out loud, like a prayer. Then she closed her eyes and pictured the gym. Folding chairs, squeaky mic, phones in the air, eyes on her. And she pictured something else too, the look on Miss Claiborne's face when the sound hit, when the joke landed not in embarrassment but revelation. Imani wasn't scared of playing badly. She was scared of being invisible again after. The next morning, she woke to silence. No alarm, just the weight of everything waiting. She stretched, wincing. Her hands still ached, wrapped in gauze her mother had replaced before leaving for work again. A note was taped to the fridge. "Leave them with a silence they'll never forget. Nam." Beside it, a thermos of warm tea and a small roll of athletic tape. Imani smiled. She unwrapped her hands carefully, flexed her fingers. Swollen, red, but steady, she pulled the violin case from the shelf and placed it on the table. The bow looked worse than it felt. She rewrapped the tip with clear tape, secured it as best she could. She didn't have resin left, so she used a pencil eraser to rough the hair, a trick she learned from a YouTube video at 2 a.m. last year. She tuned the violin by ear, a little sharp. She kept it, let them feel it buzz in their bones. By the time she walked into school, the whispers had changed shape. It wasn't just mockery now. It was expectation. "Yo, she's the last one, right? Number 16. She gonna snap that string on stage, I swear. I bet she just freezes. I bet she doesn't even show." Imani walked to them all like fog, unaffected, untouchable, moving forward with a quiet that demanded notice. Darius Green spotted her from the far side of the hallway, the soft-spoken piano kid. He jogged over, backpack half open, wires spilling out. "You ready?" he asked. "Yeah." "You doing your piece?" "Yeah." "Good." He smiled. "Don't let them look away." She didn't respond. She didn't have to. Friday was here. Her hands were hurting. Her bow was broken. But her voice? Still intact. And tomorrow, that gym would learn what it meant when a black girl, told to play as a joke, made them listen on purpose. The cafeteria smelled like overcooked pizza and undercooked out. It was Thursday, one day before talent night, and the air inside Prescott Middle felt heavier than usual, like everyone was waiting for something to crash. The tables buzzed with whispers and wagers, most of them circling one name, Imani Brooks. "She's really gonna play?" someone asked, mouth half full of corn chips. A group of 8th grade boys gathered near the vending machine, snorting between bites of cookies. "Bet she cries before she even hits a note." One said. Another replied, "Nah, bet she just runs off stage. $20. Y'all are wrong. A girl chimed in from behind her lunch tray. She's gonna freeze like a deer and then play some busted Twinkle Twinkle." The laughter that followed wasn't loud. That made it worse. It was low, smug, the kind of laughter that believed in its own certainty. Because teachers told black girl to play violin as a joke, and everyone expected it to end exactly like that. The bet jar was already forming. Slips of paper, little scribbled guesses, even some printed out memes with Imani's name photoshopped onto crying cartoon characters. She didn't see it, but she felt it. Imani sat alone at the edge of the cafeteria, near the recycling bins. She always did. Her violin case, duct taped at the corners, rested at her feet, like it always did. But this time, her hands weren't on it. They were folded. Still, steady. She heard everything. She'd trained herself to. When you're quiet, people forget you're listening. Across the room, Ms. Claiborne sipped her coffee in the teacher's corner, flipping through a performance sheet with a kind of frown that made it clear she didn't expect much. "I'm just saying," she whispered to Coach Langston, "there's still time to rearrange the lineup. Let's not end the night on a sour note." Langston, who was more interested in his phone than the roster, shrugged. She signed up fair and square. Ms. Claiborne tilted her head. Signing up and showing up are two different things. Ms. Reyes, the art teacher, walked by, overhearing just enough. She paused, leaned in, and said with a dry smile, "Sometimes the best art starts when people expect the least." Then she walked off, dropping her paint-stained tote onto a bench like punctuation. Later that day, during 8th period, the school office posted the official talent night lineup outside the main office. A crowd swarmed instantly. Name after name, singers, dancers, joke tellers, TikTok imitators. And at the very bottom, number 16, Imani Brooks, violin original. The murmurs turned sharp. She's doing original? Oh, she's finished. No one claps for a song they've never heard. It's going to be awkward as hell. She's going to embarrass herself. But one voice cut through the noise, soft but clear. Good. It came from a boy in a navy hoodie, short dreads peeking out from under his beanie. Darius Green, 7th grade. Quiet, piano kid. He stood near the water fountain, watching Imani's name on the sheet like it meant something deeper. "She's doing something they can't compare to," he said. "That's smart." The others looked at him like he'd spoken a different language. Then they laughed and walked away. But Imani heard it. She was standing around the corner, gripping the strap of her backpack, out of sight but not out of range. That one word, good, stayed with her. After school, she passed Darius in the hallway. He was kneeling next to the old, upright piano in the music room, hands gliding gently over the keys as he tested a melody that didn't sound like anything they taught in class. Something moody, minor. His fingers paused when she stopped at the door. "You heard?" He didn't look up. "Yeah. You think they're right?" she asked. He finally turned to her, eyebrows raised slightly. "Does it matter?" Imani blinked. "No," she said after a pause. "Exactly." He pulled his hoodie sleeves up, revealing ink-stained wrists. "They want you to mess up, so they don't have to admit they were wrong." She didn't answer. He added, "Don't try to win them over. Just make them feel it." Imani nodded. That was enough. That night, she sat on her bedroom floor again, violin in hand, fingers raw, lips pressed tight. She wasn't practicing notes anymore. She was sculpting emotion. Every pull of the bow across the strings wasn't just rehearsal. It was reclamation. Of her voice. Of her worth. Of everything they had tried to mock out of her. Marlin peaked in around 9 p.m. "You still not done?" She shook her head. "You gonna win?" She paused, then smiled. "I'm not trying to win," she said. "I'm trying to change the room." Marlin didn't get it, but he grinned anyway. Meanwhile, somewhere on the internet, the school's unofficial talent night predictions thread was already exploding. Imani's name was listed under most likely to bail, with a gif of a cat knocking over a violin. They didn't know she was reading every comment. She didn't cry. She didn't clap back. She just copied the link, pasted it into a notes app, and titled it Fuel. By midnight, the house was quiet. Imani sat with her violin on her lap, not playing, just breathing. She looked at her hands, blistered, stiff, pink from where tape had peeled back skin, and slowly pressed her fingers into the shape of her first note, the same one she'd start with tomorrow. Soft, subtle, but real. Let them bet against her. Let them film. Let them laugh one more time. Because when she stood on that stage, and they heard what pain sounded like when it learned how to sing, they wouldn't be laughing anymore. Friday hit like thunder. The sky over Milwaukee was steel gray, and the air carried that kind of stillness that came before something broke. Talent night. Prescott Middle. The one evening a year when folding chairs filled the gym and students tried to convince the world, or at least their peers, that they were worth more than whatever label stuck to them during lunch. Inside, the gym smelled like floor polish and middle school sweat. The squeaky mic had already failed twice during sound check. Half the teachers were double-checking their phones. The assistant principal, Mr. Cheney, stood near the entrance with a clipboard and a face that said he'd rather be anywhere else. The bleachers were packed. 8th graders with iPhones ready. 7th graders pretending not to care. 6th graders clinging to hope or fear. And somewhere behind the black curtain stage left, Imani Brooks sat. She was number 16. Her hands trembled just slightly, not enough for anyone to notice. But she noticed. Her fingers tapped softly on the worn edge of her violin case. Not rhythmically, not nervously, just as if she needed to remind herself she was still there. The voices on the other side of the curtain grew louder. Laughter, movement, a burst of applause. Act 13 had just finished. A duet. 2 boys lip-syncing a trending TikTok song. They'd ripped their pants off at the chorus. It was hard to follow something like that. Someone backstage leaned over and whispered, "Who's next?" A girl in a hoodie answered without looking up, "That quiet violin girl." Someone snorted, "Hope she knows she's in the wrong century." Another voice chimed in, "Bet she plays one note and runs." They all laughed. Imani didn't flinch. She just reached down and unlatched the case. The click was soft, sharp, like a door unlocking. Inside, her violin lay exactly where it always did, cradled in black velvet, the bow fraying at one end, the strings tuned one last time that morning. She didn't even need to look at it. Her hand found it like it was part of her body. Her name was called, or something that vaguely sounded like it. Next up we have Imani Brooks, violin, original piece. The mic feedback squealed. A cough echoed across the gym. Someone's sneakers squeaked against the wood floor. And then silence. A long, awkward, heavy silence. Imani stood. She walked out without hesitation, like she'd done it 1,000 times. Like she wasn't just a black girl who'd been told to play as a joke. Like she didn't carry a week's worth of mockery, 2 months of assumptions, and a lifetime of invisibility behind her eyes. She stepped into the light. The gym was lit by a single buzzing spotlight. It cast a yellow halo across the stage, and her shadow stretched long and uncertain behind her. She wore no makeup, no sequins, no shoes. Just jeans, a faded maroon shirt, and bare feet that padded silently across the hardwood. She didn't bow. She didn't speak. She didn't glance at the crowd or the teachers or the kids with their phones already raised, fingers poised to record what they thought would be a train wreck. She simply lifted the violin to her shoulder. And then, nothing. For 3 full seconds, she didn't move, didn't blink. The bow hovered in the air like a question mark. Coach Langston shifted in his folding chair. Ms. Claiborne leaned forward, eyes narrowed. A boy in the front row whispered, "She's freezing." But then the bow fell, and everything changed. The first note was a whisper. It trembled in the air like a secret trying to escape. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't loud, but it held. And then came the second, then the third. By the 5th note, the gym wasn't breathing. It wasn't a melody they recognized. It wasn't a cover. It wasn't safe. It wasn't pretty. It was raw. Grief in a minor key. Hope hanging on a single string. Years of being overlooked, ridiculed, underestimated, all twisted into chord that climbed and bent and clawed their way into the silence. Her bow danced across the strings like it had teeth. At one point, her left foot tapped against the floor, grounding herself. Her right hand pulled the sound harder, faster, until the gym wasn't gym anymore. It was a storm, a memory, a reckoning. Halfway through, her tempo changed. The music cracked wide open. The low strings groaned like mourning. The high ones soared like defiance. It was like she was speaking to the violin in a language only her bones understood. Her eyes were closed, not from fear, from focus. This wasn't just a performance. It was survival. When she hit the crescendo, someone gasped. Coach Langston's phone slipped out his lap. He didn't reach for it. Even Miss Claiborne, who had been chewing on a pen cap, sat frozen, her hand halfway to her mouth. And then the final note. It rang like a bell, long, heavy, unapologetic. She didn't drag it. She didn't fade it. She let it hang in the gym like a question no one knew how to answer. And then it stopped. She stood still, bowed down, violin against her chest, breathing hard, not smiling, not crying, just standing. The gym didn't know what to do. It was too quiet. Until one clap from the back, then another, and another, and then it was everywhere. Clapping that didn't sound like politeness. It sounded like relief, like people realizing they'd just witnessed something they couldn't name. The kids who had laughed, they didn't look at her. The ones who bet she'd freeze, some of them were already lowering their phones. Darius stood up first. Then came a ripple. Others followed, even the ones who'd printed memes. Imani didn't bask. She didn't bow. She just walked off the stage, her bare feet whispering across the wood. Coach Langston blinked like he'd just come out of a trance. Miss Claiborne didn't speak. She didn't need to. The air had already answered for her. For a moment after Imani stepped off stage, the gym didn't return to normal. It couldn't. The kind of silence she left behind wasn't the kind that filled a space. It was the kind that emptied it, of judgment, of noise, of everything they thought they knew. The next act was announced, a comedy skit by two 8th grade boys. They shuffled on stage awkwardly, one tripping over the mic cord. But no one really heard them. Not the lines, not the punchlines. Because the echo of Imani's last note still lingered somewhere above the bleachers, like a thundercloud that refused to leave. Mr. Cheney, the assistant principal, hadn't written a single note on his clipboard since Act 16. Coach Langston still held his phone in one hand, but hadn't unlocked it in 10 minutes. Miss Claiborne sat statue still, legs crossed, pen frozen in midair. She didn't blink much, didn't fidget, just stare at the curtain Imani had walked through, as if it still held the version of the girl she'd been comfortable underestimating. They had all witnessed something. But what made it unforgettable wasn't just the sound of Imani's violin. It was what it revealed. A storm doesn't just soak you. It shows you what was weak to begin with. That gym had been filled with tension for years. Division by race, class, popularity, volume. And for one moment, all of it had cracked. Because a quiet black girl didn't follow the script they'd written for her. And that unscripted truth, that was what no one could breathe through. Across the bleachers, kids weren't whispering anymore. Some of the loudest mouths had their heads down, unsure what to do with their hands. A few turned off their phones, ashamed they'd filmed her like a spectacle. Even fewer hit delete right away. Darius Green sat 2 rows in the front, hands clasped in his lap, eyes locked on the now empty stage. He hadn't blinked during the entire performance. Now, he couldn't look anywhere else. He felt it in his chest, not just the music, but the dare inside it. It was like Imani had said, "Feel this, or don't, but I'm not playing for your approval." Behind the curtain, Imani crouched beside her violin case, finally letting the instrument rest. Her hands were still buzzing, not shaking, just alive. She pressed her fingers against her jeans, grounding herself. Her face was unreadable, not proud, not emotional, just settled, like she had poured something out that had taken too long to name. She hadn't expected applause. She hadn't expected a standing ovation either. But what hit her hardest was that no one laughed. No one had laughed. And that mattered. Hey! She turned. Darius stood just past the curtain, holding a paper cup of water, like he wasn't sure if he was offering it or just using it to anchor himself. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Imani nodded once and took the cup. Thanks. You wrote that? Yeah. Dang. That was all he said, but it landed heavier than most essays. She gave him a faint smile, the kind that said, I see you seeing me. Back out in the audience, a girl named Raina who had once joked about Imani's shoes leaned over to her friend and whispered, She's not weird. She's just better than us. Her friend didn't argue. Even the sixth graders knew something had shifted. They didn't fully understand what they'd watched, but they knew it mattered, that the world had tilted just a little, and that they might remember this night in a way they wouldn't remember math tests or pep rallies. The bell eventually rang, signaling dismissal, but it felt wrong, like the room needed a moment of silence instead. Students filed out slower than usual. Less noise, less swagger, fewer jokes. Ms. Reyes, the art teacher, walked over to Coach Langston. Did you know she could do that? Langston shook his head. I thought she was just another shy kid. She's not, Reyes said softly. She's lightning in a bottle. Ms. Claiborne didn't join the hallway chatter. She stood at the edge of the gym for a long while, arms folded, lips pressed in, watching students disappear through the double doors. Her eyes finally settled on the talent sign-up sheet still taped near the entrance. Number 16, Imani Brooks. She stared at the name like it had been written in fire. A part of her, the part buried under layers of rules and routines and biases she never admitted to, wanted to tear it down, not out of spite, out of guilt. Instead, she walked away without touching it. Backstage, Imani zipped her violin case closed and exhaled, not out of relief, but out of release. Danielle would be picking her up soon. Marlon would probably ask her what song she'd played. She wouldn't have a name for it, just a truth. As she stepped out into the main hallway, phones didn't rise. No one jeered. A few people parted. A few nodded. One girl said, "You were amazing," then walked off like she was afraid of being too late to say it. But the best part? No one called her weird. No one told her she was brave. They just looked at her. Finally, really looked at her, and saw a storm in a girl's frame. Not an act. Not a fluke, but a reminder. It wasn't until the gym doors closed and the night grew quiet that the weight of what happened truly began to settle. The echo of Imani Brooks' final note didn't fade. It clung to the air like smoke after a fire, haunting, thick, impossible to ignore. The applause had stopped. The folding chairs had been stacked. The mic unplugged and coiled like nothing had happened. But inside the hearts of everyone who had been there, something had. Especially the ones who didn't want it to. Ms. Claiborne stood in the staff parking lot long after the other teachers had driven off. Her keys dangled from one hand, untouched. She leaned against the cold steel of her car and stared into nothing. She wasn't used to being speechless. Sarcasm had always been her armor. But now, she couldn't think of a single word that didn't feel hollow. That girl, that sound, that presence, it had cracked something in her. And the worst part, the crack had always been there. She just didn't want to look at it. Inside her apartment later that evening, she poured herself a glass of wine and replayed the moment in her head. The first note, thin as a breath, had stopped time. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. It reminded her of something she couldn't quite place. Maybe a memory. Maybe a version of herself she'd buried years ago. One who used to believe in stories like Imani's. Now, all she could hear was that violin, and the unspoken question it left in its wake. Why didn't you believe in her? Elsewhere in Milwaukee, in a dim second-floor apartment above a pawn shop, Imani lay on her bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. Her violin rested nearby, closed in its case, but still humming in her mind. Marlon was asleep, curled at the foot of her bed, clutching an old stuffed dog. Danielle sat at the kitchen table, flipping through unpaid bills but not really seeing them. Her hands were still warm from holding Imani's after the performance. She whispered only one thing as they got into the car. "You did what I never could." Imani didn't respond. She didn't have to. Her entire body still buzzed like she'd been struck by lightning from the inside out. The video had already been posted. 2 angles, 3 uploads, one had over 4,000 views in just a few hours. The caption was short and blunt. Teachers told black girl to play violin as a joke. They regret it when she starts playing. Hashtags followed. Hashtag Imani Brooks, hashtag Violin Storm, hashtag Truth in Strings. Most of the comments were stunned, supportive, emotional. Some were defensive. Some said, "Why make it about race?" But others clapped back with clarity, because they made it about race before she even touched the bow. Back at school, the shift didn't hit like a wave. It arrived like fog, slow, creeping, irrevocable. On Monday morning, as the bell rang and kids flooded the hallways, things felt different, quieter, less biting. A few kids offered Imani space in the hallway she'd never been given before. A few even nodded. One girl whispered, "That's her," like she was describing a myth. Mr. Langston, holding a coffee he hadn't taken a sip of, saw her at the end of the hallway. "Brooks," he called, awkwardly, lifting his cup in a vague half-toast. Friday was, wow. Imani gave him a look. Not cruel, not warm, just unbothered. "Thanks," she said, and kept walking. But it was Ms. Claiborne who felt the shift the hardest. She stood at her classroom door, like she did every morning, clipboard in hand, waiting to greet students. But when she saw Imani approaching, something froze in her throat. Imani stopped, just short of the doorframe. Their eyes met. "I owe you an apology," Claiborne said quietly, so only Imani could hear. "What I said, what I implied last week, it wasn't right." Imani didn't flinch. She didn't blink. "You should have seen me before Friday," she said flatly. The words landed heavier than any scolding Claiborne had ever given. They weren't meant to hurt, but they did, because they were true. Down the hall, a few kids passed by, laughing at something on a phone screen. But when they noticed Imani, the laughter stalled. No mocking, just a pause. And then a step aside. Respect didn't need to be loud. Sometimes it was the quiet that told you things had changed. At lunch, Darius Green saved her a seat. He didn't say anything at first, just passed her a chocolate milk and shrugged. "Want to write something together sometime?" he finally asked. She smirked. "You can keep up?" He grinned. "I'll try." In the far corner of the lunchroom, a group of boys who'd once joked about cat screeches didn't look up when she walked past. They just stayed quiet. And in that quiet, Imani found her own kind of victory. Not revenge, recognition. Later that night, at home, Danielle scrolled through the video again. She'd watched it 6 times. Not because she didn't believe it happened, but because it still didn't feel real. Her daughter, on a stage, owning the moment like it belonged to her. She glanced down at her phone as a notification popped up. Local news. Milwaukee Middle School talent show sparks viral moment about identity and belief. She smiled. Imani didn't play to prove anything. But somehow, she proved everything. And they couldn't breathe through it. Because for the first time, they were being asked to feel. Monday's sky was a dull blanket of gray, the kind that made the buildings in Milwaukee look colder, older. Rain hadn't fallen. But the streets were slick as if the city had sweated through the tension left from the weekend. Inside Prescott Middle School, the halls buzzed in their usual way. Lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking, whispered gossip. But when Imani Brooks stepped through the front doors, the energy shifted. It wasn't loud. It was quieter than usual. Intentional. Eyes followed her. Not with mockery. Not like before. This time, it was different, measured, cautious, respectful. A few students nodded at her. Some looked away out of shame. Others made space without thinking, stepping aside in hallways they'd never given a room in before. Imani walked through it all like water around stones, still focused, untouched. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't shrinking either. She had stopped shrinking the moment her bow touched string. And now, they were seeing her the way they should have seen her all along. As she approached room 204, a familiar shape stood in the doorway. Clipboard clutched to her chest, shoulders tense. Miss Claiborne looked like someone rehearsing a speech in her head and losing the battle. Imani's steps didn't slow until Ms. Claiborne cleared her throat. Imani, just a name, nothing else. But it carried the weight of something deeper. It wasn't the voice of a teacher. It was the voice of a person trying to shed something heavy. Guilt, maybe, or fear. Imani stopped. She didn't cross the threshold. She didn't lean in. She just stood there, silent, watching. "I owe you an apology," Claiborne said. The words came out stiff, not from pride, but because she wasn't used to admitting she was wrong. Especially not to a student. Especially not like this. "What I said last week, what I implied," she paused, her grip tightening on the clipboard. "It wasn't right." Imani didn't flinch. Her face didn't soften. She waited, and in the silence, Claiborne understood that words alone weren't enough. "Not now, not anymore. I judge you," she continued, "not just your music. I assumed things that I had no right to assume." Imani still didn't say anything. Claiborne shifted on her feet. "I'm still learning," she offered, almost like a confession. A beat passed, then another, and then, softly but clearly, Imani replied, "You should have seen me before Friday." It was a simple line, but it hit like a stone through glass, because behind that sentence was the real message. You didn't just miss the performance. You missed the whole person. Claiborne blinked, and for the first time since she started teaching, she felt completely and painfully out of her depth. This wasn't about classroom control or test scores. This was about humanity, and the realization that she'd failed to show it when it mattered most. "Thank you," she said finally, "for reminding me." Imani didn't respond. She didn't have to. She turned and walked into the classroom, her violin case swinging softly at her side. She didn't look back. Behind her, Claiborne stayed frozen in the doorway, watching the girl she had once turned into a punchline take her seat by the window, like a queen reclaiming her throne. In the cafeteria later, the whispers had changed. "She really did that. I watched it twice last night. My mom cried." Even the ones who didn't clap on Friday now avoided meeting Imani's eyes. Darius Green slid into the seat across from her at lunch and slid a folded flyer across the table. "Youth orchestra auditions downtown," he said. Imani raised an eyebrow. "I'm going," he added. "You should too." She didn't answer right away. Her fingers traced the edge of the paper. Finally, she asked, "You think they'll hear me differently now?" Darius shrugged. "You made an entire school stop breathing with one song. If they don't hear you now, that's their problem." She smirked. Barely, but it was there. In the faculty lounge, Ms. Reyes, the art teacher, scrolled through her phone, replaying Imani's performance for the third time that day. Across the room, Coach Langston sat silently, elbows on his knees, eyes on the floor. "She didn't just play," Reyes murmured. "She told a story." Langston nodded once, and we almost missed it. No one disagreed. That evening, in apartment 2B above the pawn shop, Imani rested on the floor with Marlon curled up next to her. They were watching cartoons on mute, their own kind of peace. The violin was still in its case. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the pressure to touch it. Her mother peeked in from the kitchen. "You not practicing?" Imani shook her head. "Not tonight." Danielle came and sat beside her. "You good?" Imani thought about that, about the silence that followed her steps at school, about the tears in one girl's eyes as she whispered, "You made me feel seen," about Claiborne's eyes, hollow with realization, about her own heartbeat when the gym erupted in claps that didn't sound like noise, but release. She nodded. "Yeah, I'm good." The internet was still buzzing. The video had passed 100,000 views. The caption stayed the same. Teachers told black girl to play violin as a joke. They regret it when she starts playing. It had become more than a title. It was now a lesson, a memory, a mirror, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a new way forward. The light in apartment 2B was soft, filtered through dollar store curtains that had seen too many winters. It was Sunday evening, And for the first time in weeks, Imani Brooks wasn't practicing. The violin case sat untouched in the corner, still zipped, still humming with everything it had already said. Imani sat cross-legged on the worn living room rug, her little brother Marlon curled up beside her, head resting on her thigh. The cartoon on the TV was playing with the sound off, but neither of them seemed to mind. Her mother, Danielle, peeked around the doorframe. "You're not going to open today?" Imani shook her head, slow and certain. "Not tonight." Danielle walked in, wiped her hands on her pants, and lowered herself onto the couch. Her eyes traced her daughter's face, calm, tired, changed. "You good?" she asked. Imani paused, breathing deep. "Yeah, I'm good." And she meant it, not in a polite way, not in the way adults ask kids out of habit. She meant good in her bones, in her breath, in her silence, because something had shifted, not just in the school gymnasium, but in her, and the world was noticing. By Monday morning, the video had spread like wildfire. A student from the front row had posted it, shaky hands and all. The caption read, "Teachers told black girl to play violin as a joke. They regret it when she starts playing." It wasn't fancy. No editing. No music overlay. Just the truth, raw and bare. A girl, a bow, and a room stunned into stillness. By lunch, it had passed 500,000 views. By evening, it had gone national. The comments were flooded. She didn't just play. She preached. "I'm a music teacher and I'm crying. This girl is fire. Someone get her a scholarship. Right now." The words came from everywhere. Texas, Toronto, Tokyo. Imani wasn't chasing fame. She didn't even have a TikTok. But people recognized truth when they heard it, and they couldn't stop replaying hers. At school, things were different now. Not in a fairy tale way. No one was throwing roses at her feet. But when Imani walked down the halls of Prescott Middle School, people noticed. They paused. They nodded. And most importantly, they listened. The ones who once whispered now stayed quiet. The ones who laughed now looked away. And a few brave ones leaned in with curiosity instead of contempt. "Hey, Forrester." One boy started at lunch before correcting himself. "I mean, Brooks. Imani Brooks. That was cool what you did." Imani gave a small nod, lips curled just slightly. "Thanks." She didn't need to say more. In the teacher's lounge, the shift was happening too. Coach Langston had replayed the performance 3 times on his phone that morning. Ms. Reyes cried into her thermos during the staff meeting. Even Principal Howard, a man famous for his poker face, emailed the school board requesting funding for a formal music program. And Ms. Claiborne? She wasn't the same. Gone was the smirk, the sarcasm. In its place was something unfamiliar. Reflection. She hadn't said anything beyond her apology, but she had started listening more, talking less. She stopped interrupting students mid-sentence. She even cleared space on her bulletin board for artwork and poetry, anonymous, if needed. One afternoon, in the quiet corner of the library, Imani found a sealed envelope on the piano bench where Darius usually practiced. It had her name on it, written in careful block letters. Inside was a handwritten note. "You made the room stop breathing. Now the world is holding its breath. Play it again when they forget. Do you understand?" She didn't cry, but she stared at those words longer than she'd stared at any math problem in her life. Weeks passed. The attention simmered, as it always does. Other stories rose. Other videos trended. But the echo of her performance still lingered. A music school in Chicago reached out about auditions. A nonprofit mailed her a brand new bow, no note included, just a stamp label that said, "For the one who played her truth." A local radio show asked Danielle for an interview. She declined. "This ain't about me," she told them. "And my daughter?" She already said what needed saying with 4 strings. One night, Imani sat on the floor, her old violin beside her. She hadn't played in days, not out of fear, but out of fullness. Sometimes you don't speak because you're empty, and sometimes you don't speak because the room still remembers your voice. Marlon climbed into her lap, clutching a folded flyer from his backpack. "Ms. Reyes told me to give you this," he said. "It was for an arts mentorship program. Summer. Scholarships. Weekly lessons with symphony musicians." Imani stared at it for a long time, then looked at her brother. "You think I should do it?" Marlon tilted his head. "Was that a joke?" She laughed. "Not loud, but real. I'll think about it." He snuggled closer. "Play something?" She hesitated, then picked up the violin not like a burden, but like a friend. No performance this time. No audience. Just her brother, and the fading hum of city that had finally started to hear her. She placed a bow on the string. And this time the note didn't shake. It soared. Some clapped because it was beautiful. Some clapped because they were ashamed. But a few, just a few, changed. And sometimes that's enough. Because the silence may be powerful. But one note, played with truth, it can crack the world open. And rebuild it. That night, Imani didn't touch her violin. It rested where she left it. Quietly, respectfully, like a soldier at ease. She sat beside Marlon on their worn couch, watching cartoons with the sound off, their laughter unspoken but understood. Danielle peeked in from the kitchen, towel in hand. "You not practicing?" "Not tonight." Imani said. "You good?" She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I'm good." And maybe that was enough. Because not everyone who clapped did it, because they cared. Not everyone who stood that day truly changed, but some did. And sometimes, that's how something begins. Not with a spotlight, but with a note played loud enough to break the silence. So if this story reached you, if it reminded you that some voices rise not with volume, but with purpose, then don't let it stop here. Like it, share it, let someone else hear what they're not expecting. And if you want more stories like this, the real, raw, truth-telling kind, hit subscribe. We've got more coming. Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more truth. And truth, it always finds a way to be heard.